So, synchronous learning. Really brief overview again of my schedule. Whenever I'm teaching synchronously, whether that's entirely remotely or in this concurrent model, we always start with a check-in community question. We move, we breathe. I review the norms and expectations for class. I do direct instruction. The students go and practice or apply that skill in some way. And then finally, we all come back together for a wrap up and goodbye. In the October Success Kit, I talked a lot about sort of the philosophy behind this and some of my best practices. Tonight, I'll go through it again, this time focusing on how to engage students, how to make it fun, how to make it interesting, and how to get them all on board. So the first thing that I do before class is I always make a nice little welcoming environment for them. And I use a tool called Classroom Screen to do that. I'm going to go ahead now and start demonstrating some of these tools. So I'm going to go into my accessibility features on my Chromebook, get a nice big mouse so that you can follow along. And I'm going to head over to Classroom Screen. Classroom Screen is a really amazing tool, partially because it's free and you don't even need to log in to use it. All you need to do is click that launch button and a classroom screen will launch itself in a new tab. Now, it is exactly as the name implies. It is just a screen that sort of houses everything that you usually do in the classroom. Think of it a little bit like your virtual whiteboard. If I were in a full-time classroom, I would be projecting this to the whiteboard at the front of the room. If I were entirely remote, I would be sharing this on Google Meet or Zoom as a tab. Or if I were in that concurrent environment, I would again be sharing it on Google Meet or Zoom and probably also projecting it to the front of the room. Here are the features that you have at the bottom, this toolbar here at the bottom. First, you can change the background. So I have that nice little penguin, but you can change the background to any number of different natural or solid sort of backgrounds. You can also upload your own image for a background. So if you have a Bitmoji classroom or something like that, you can use it. I like to use this sort of chalkboard looking feature just because it feels very educational. Then I usually use that text feature right there in the middle to make a note to my class, like, hello, welcome. Oops, that's not how you spell hello. And I also post the do now or bell ringer activity in this text box. I like to give a clock so that students can see the time or they can count down how much time is left until class starts. And then also, I really like to use this media feature in order to play a YouTube video for my class before class starts. So I ask them for song suggestions, and then I pull that up from YouTube by dropping the link, and I'll play that on Classroom Stream for them before class starts. So when they arrive in class, whether that's physically or virtually, they'll see their do now, they'll hear some music that they've requested, and they'll also see this clock counting down to when class starts. Once we move into direct instruction, the most important piece of engaging students is making sure that you're hearing from them often. We do this in the classroom all the time. We're asking students to raise their hand and give feedback. We're asking them to give us physical cues like thumbs up, medium, down, to nod their head, shake their head, and do all sorts of other different feedback techniques. In a remote or in a hybrid environment, we need to translate this into a digital mode. And that's why I utilize the chat box so much. I try not to let more than 5 minutes go by before I ask students to write something into the chat box. I don't want to give them an opportunity to really sit back and pick up their phone and start to invest themselves in something else, because they need to be responding in the chat box all the time. It's how I gauge attendance, and it's how I gauge participation for class. So when I ask them to type in the chat box, sometimes I remind them, remember, this is part of your attendance for today, or remember, this is part of your participation for today. Some of the things I have them type in the chat box here when they arrive for class as a part of attendance. Whenever they go do an activity elsewhere, they tell me that they're back or they're done in the chat box. If we share, we type clap, 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 or to emojis in the chat box. We always say goodbye to each other in the chat box before we leave. I'll ask them to rate something on a scale of 1 to 10, not just how they are, but how was that video? How well are you understanding? How interesting does this look to you? Or a stop, slow, go when I'm teaching. Are we understanding? Should I slow down and repeat? Or is this so confusing we need to stop completely? I always recommend, if you have really little learners who aren't typing fluently yet, instead of having them type full words or sentences, ask them to just type a single key. So if they can identify the Q button on their keyboard, ask them, anyone who has a question right now, go ahead and type the Q into the chat box and I can call on you. That could be an alternative. However, whenever I am actually introducing new content or reviewing material, I almost always use Pear Deck. Again, if you were with me in October, I went into Pear Deck in quite a bit of detail. So if you want more instructions on how to create Pear Deck, make sure you check out the October toolkit. But just for those of you who might be new, Pear Deck is a great formative assessment tool that allows you to take your presentation, your Google Slides, or your PowerPoint, and add interactive elements into them that students can work through as you're teaching. So as you can see here on this demonstration, they can do multiple choice questions that as the teacher, you can see how they're responding on the back end. They can type number-based answers. And again, as a teacher, you can see those numbers or text-based responses on the back end. And that allows me to see which of my students are engaging in the lesson, and more than that, which of my students are understanding the lesson. So Pear Deck is my #1 synchronous teaching tool. However, I also use Jamboard quite a bit during my live synchronous teaching. What Jamboard is it is a virtual or digital whiteboard. And the best part about it is, just like any other Google file type, it can be collaborative. So just a little bit on Jamboard. All you need to do to access Jamboard is go to jamboard.google.com. You can also access it up here in the top right through your waffle. You see a little Jamboard icon there, or you can just Google the word Jamboard. Once you're in your dashboard, at the bottom right-hand corner, there's a big plus sign, and that will allow you to click into a new Jamboard. And as you can see, it's just this blank white screen. On your left-hand side, these are all your tools, which will allow you to write. So you have a pen tool. I'm doing this on my mouse, but I can also take my finger because I have a touch screen, and I can write on the virtual whiteboard with my finger as well. I can change the color or the type of pen stroke I'm using. I have an eraser. I have a pointer. The option I use most often is the sticky note option, and you'll see in a moment why, but I can type notes here on the sticky notes, and I can make multiple notes at the same time. You can insert images directly onto Jamboard. I like to use Google image search. So if I want to find a cat, I can find a nice little picture of a cat and insert that directly onto here. And again, because this is a whiteboard and annotation tool, we can write directly on that element. So you can annotate on top of that image, you could insert text, and you can highlight or underline on top of that image. A lot of great features there. And then this is just a normal text box. So those are the basics of Jamboard, but what I really want to show you is how I'm using it in my classroom. Most often what I do is I start in this classroom template. So as you can see down here, I have an 8th grade template, and all that's on it is a sticky note with each one of my students' names. What I ask my students to do when we do a Jamboard lesson is to double click into their name, write their answer on their sticky note, and then click save. When we're all working on Jamboard together, you'll see all your students' responses in the same place at the same time, which is a really nice feature for, again, determining the engagement level in your class, but it's also engaging and fun for students to work on it. Once I have all of my students' names in sticky notes here, whenever I do a lesson, all I've got to do is go to my 3 dots in the top right-hand corner. I say make a copy of this Jamboard. And then in this new copy, I add questions and I add the elements that I want my students to complete. So maybe I'll put a text box in the middle and I'll put question number 1 here, but I'm really going to have them do several questions. So I'll go to the top where I have these slides. My 3 dots again will allow me to duplicate that. And I can go into the second Jamboard slide and ask a second question. When I'm doing this live with students, the most important thing is to pre-teach expectations. Because it is a live collaborative file, it means if Daniel wanted to, he could come in and he could delete Caitlin's sticky note, or he could come in and he could draw all over the Jamboard. So I really have to emphasize to my students the importance of digital citizenship and being able to work collaboratively together on a project. I tell them 2 things. Number 1, I incentivize them and I say, if we can do this well, when we finish the lesson, I'll give you a blank Jamboard and you can do whatever you want on it for a minute. You can add images, you can delete each other's stuff, you can move things around, you can go crazy for a whole minute. And then I'll also give a consequence and I'll say, and if you can't do it, then I'm going to have to stop the Jamboard lesson and you'll just have to listen to me explain it, which is going to be less fun. With that all in place, I've been able to do several different activities synchronously using Jamboard, and it's gone really well. So emphasizing those norms and expectations. Once you have it all set up, I go to share in the top right-hand corner. At the very bottom where it says get link, I change it to anybody with this link can edit. Then I copy that link and I give it to my students. This is another reason why I think it's a best practice to have all your students on Google Meet, whether they're in the classroom or at home, because I can really easily just drop that link for my students here in the chat box. If your students are not all on Google Meet together at the same time, you could also post this to your Google Classroom stream or whatever your learning management system is.